Prepare to be captivated by the business story of the week, hosted by me, Shaahin Cheyene. Join us on a journey through the twists and turns of entrepreneurial triumphs and setbacks. Immerse yourself in the narrative and witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. This is Business Story of the Week.
Welcome to Business Story of the Week. You guys know how it is. We bring you success stories that inspire and motivate. And in this episode, boy, do we have a success story. Today, our guest is the founder of Podcast Cola, the largest podcast promotion agency in the world. Shaahin is a serial entrepreneur with a career that spans more than 30 years and over $1 billion in revenue. He is a sought-after expert and consultant when it comes to anything about enhancing your revenue streams and disrupting the market. Now, that last part is very interesting because Shaahin really did disrupt the market at a very young age by kicking off the whole nootropics business or the whole nootropics movement. Today, we're going to talk about the power of podcasting, why it's best to sell your product and increase your revenue with podcasting. Shaahin, how are you doing? Good morning in Southern California.
Hey, good morning, Josh. Great. I'm grateful to be on. Thanks for having me on the show.
Fantastic. Shaahin, before we get into this, I have to ask, and this is because it's very interesting. I want to first establish your reputation, not only as a serial entrepreneur, but as a market disruptor, right? So for our listeners out there, Shaahin Cheyene, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Shaahin is the creator of herbal ecstasy when he was only 15 years old. I find that very impressive. So you tell us about this, Shaahin. Why nootropics at such a young age? And why do you think that creation kicked off the entire movement so much?
Yeah, wow. Great introduction. Thanks, Josh. So I started when I was really young. We were immigrants. We came to this country, United States, from Iran. And I was looking for a way that I could get rich. And I had read Think and Grow Rich. I'd read a lot of the great self-help books. And I thought to myself, man, I would like to be rich. I would like to have the fancy cars and all the things that came with wealth. But there was no path for me that was leading to that. And I knew that I was a really good storyteller. And what I did was I got involved in the electronic music scene that was really happening big in the 90s. And I decided that I was going to create a alternative to a drug that was going around at that time called ecstasy. I created a version of it that was natural, that was legal, that was very safe. And the company blew up and we made over $1 billion in revenue. And this was all before I was 21.
What got you into nootropics so early at such a young age? But also, why do you think that particular creation was such an inspiration to the entire movement?
It was really necessity. For me, it was watching the market and seeing what the market needed. The supply of that specific product was gone and the demand was higher than it ever was. So watching supply and demand, knowing that selling through story is the best way to sell anything. And I just went out there and I did it. I created an alternative to what people thought was impossible, what people thought was impossible to do. And through that, created one of the most successful supplements of all time.
That's just really impressive. And you did that before you were 21. That is so impressive. So speaking of kicking off, movements, starting industries, disrupting markets, let's get into this a little bit more when it comes to podcasting. Shaahin, today podcasts are a dime a dozen, right? All thanks to the still most popular podcast today, JRE. Ever since he kickstarted the industry, like you did with the nootropics, it quickly became a phenomenon where all your uncles and all your neighbors have podcasts, right? But why do you think that is? Why do you think it's become such a huge phenomenon? And why has it turned into an effective way to promote or sell anything?
Yeah. So let's talk about this. So I think that's a really good question. And this is what I think. So let's move back a little bit. So I like to think about my life, right? And I look back on my life and I think to myself, what are the things that I'm really good at? Right. It's one of the things that was written at the Temple of Delphi, know thyself. One of the key things that I feel like every human being needs to do. Now, in order to know yourself, you can't only know your strengths, you also have to know your weaknesses. Perhaps more important than knowing your strengths. Now, with that said, I know that I'm really good at a very narrow band of things. You can probably count it on one hand, the things that I'm really world class at. And everything else, I'm really bad at. But I'm really good at delegating and finding people that are world class at the things that I'm weak at. Now, with that said, it brings me to your question about podcasting or about storytelling. And I'll tell you what it is. And it's that I knew that I was a very good storyteller. And I knew that the best way to sell something is through the power of story, through authority, through social proof, what Professor Cialdini in his book Influence talks about. Now, when you do a podcast, when you are a guest on somebody else's podcast, even more effective, you are selling through the power of authority. That person gets to know you. That person gets to hear your story, gets to spend an hour with you, getting to know the intricacies of your business and what you do. So you're doing what Seth Godin, the great Seth Godin, the amazing marketing professor, talks about, author and professor now, I think, is you are doing pull marketing. You're doing permission marketing. People are going to come to you because of your story. You don't have to go somewhere and push your message, your product, your service down people's throats. Now, comes back to my point of being really good at a few things, at a handful of things. I'm really freaking good at spotting trends. And what I've noticed over the last few years, and one of the reasons why my company, Podcast Cola, is having such unprecedented success right now, is that podcasting is taking over where legacy media has left off. People are cutting the cord. There's very little terrestrial TV anymore. I don't know anybody else who, at least in my address book, that has a traditional television that just watches it over the thing. People want media on command. People want to consume content that's tailored for them, specifically the little things that they're looking for. The other day, I was trying to fix something here around the house. By the way, not one of the things that I'm good at. And I found a podcast, and the guy told me exactly how to fix the thing. How much TV would I have to watch to get that piece of information? Right?
We don't have commercials.
How many commercials? We don't have time for that. Right? But what I do have time is to get to know somebody through a podcast. So I listened to this guy's podcast. I was like, wow, this guy's cool. Looked him up. Man, he teaches a whole class on how to fix these electronic things. Wow. That sounds fun. I bought his book. I bought his class. Now I'm in his ecosystem. I get emails every few weeks. You think if this guy has an in-person thing, if he's, if I need him and I want to consult, if I need to hire somebody, I'm going to go to his ecosystem because I am in his sphere of influence now. And that's what podcasts do. They let you create raving fans and bring them into your sphere of influence. By podcasting, you can create these ecosystems of raving fans and have those raving fans inside the sphere of influence that you control. Now, here's the thing. Most people will think to themselves, man, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm so excited. They get a couple buddies together. They do it by themselves. And they start a podcast and they're so excited. They've come up with a great name. They spent days coming up with a great name. And they start that YouTube channel and they put it up. And it's Tumbleweed City. It's super quiet. They've got 2 likes and one is from their mom. And they're wondering to themselves, why am I not getting the attention? Why am I not getting the eyeballs? And I'll tell you why. Here's the answer. Because there's so much great stuff out there. As we speak, as we record, there's over 8 million podcasts out there.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a limited amount of time. Am I going to listen to you, or am I going to listen to Joe Rogan? Am I going to listen to the BBC or NPR? Am I going to listen to Guy Raz, or am I going to listen to you? Here's where you have the advantage. And I found a workaround for this. I found a hack to this. You want to know what that hack is, Josh?
What was that hack? So you've told me about podcasting, as I like the way you put it. It's people leaving the legacy media and you creating your fans, bringing them into your sphere of influence. And I think it's because it's also very personal, and it's very great to see the speaker and the host. It's a great way to see them for who they really are. But all of them, how do you stand out? It's all quiet. Everyone wants to start a podcast. They don't know how to get it up and running. So what's the hack, Shaahin? How can I make this podcast endeavor profitable for me?
So here's the hack to winning in the podcast space. You go on other people's podcasts as a featured guest. And now what we're going to do is borrow their audience and use that to grow your show. And if you look at some of the top podcasters, people like Patrick Bet-David, even Joe Rogan, this new guy, Alex Hormozy, who's making big waves on the internet, great content.
Great content.
That's one of the main tactics that they use. They go on other people's podcasts. Now, you've got a 2-tiered approach. One is, I'm using your audience, Josh. I'm borrowing that audience and bringing them over to my podcast. And by the way, everybody, make sure you check out Business Story of the Week online, like and subscribe if you're watching this on Business Story like here. But you become a guest on other people's podcasts. When you do that, you just ask them, you say, hey, Josh, would it be okay with you if I rebroadcast this through my network and sent you some subscribers? I currently have 65,000, 70,000 subscribers, and I'd like to share with them this content on my platform, as well as you sharing it on your platform. I'm also going to cut clips and put it out through social, and we're going to work together to blow the show that we're doing up, because we're creating really great content, and it would be a shame if not enough people saw it.
That's fantastic. That's a really great way to put it. And if we're also kind of relating it back to what you said when it came to legacy media, how these old shows would have their guests on here and all they would do is promote. We're technically doing that right now in our own kind of like industry, or in our own sphere of influence, where we're inviting people over, we're borrowing their audience and multiplying each other's audience in the process. And that it makes so much sense that is a great way to double your revenue when it comes to your podcasting. So why do you think that now is a great way to take advantage of that? Apart, of course, from the movement of podcasting, why do you think it's that people still like to listen to podcasts?
Yeah, so podcasts are powerful, and that's a really good question. First off, the majority of podcasts that happen are long form. You're not just scrolling through a TikTok or an Instagram and a dancing girl comes on and you're gone over there in the other direction, which happens to 99% of people. Those things, our current social media landscape is designed to steal your time and attention away from anything other than what they want you to look at in that moment.
That's true.
Podcasts are different. With podcasts, you get to know in depth a story. You get to be in the car with that person when they're waiting for their kid in soccer practice, when they're in the gym working out, when they're outside working out with their spouse or with whoever. They're listening to you. And the more content you put out, the more they feel like they know you. I've had so many clients come to me and be like, Shaahin, I know we've just been talking for 15 minutes, but I feel like I know you. And it's because they do. I've been talking to them for hours and hours through the content that I produce. So by the time they get on the phone with me, we're already buds. That trust is created because they're in that sphere of influence, right? There's all these things that you need to do to sell people on your message, on your product, on your service. And the less they trust you, the less they know who you are, I mean, genuinely trust you, the more work you need to do to sell them.
Absolutely.
Right. But if they know you through the medium of podcasting, if they've been listening to your podcast and they've been watching your YouTube videos, by the time you get to know that customer and actually get on a call with them or that potential customer, they already know you. The level of trust is very high. And there's no other form of marketing that I know right now that has that impact. But here's the thing. Most people think that you're going to go on one podcast and it's going to be hugely successful. The fact is that it's a marathon and not a race. It takes time to build great content. It takes time to tell great stories. So you have to first start off by doing smaller podcasts, getting known in the podcast community, building that body of content, maybe having your own podcast, and just, you don't have to produce a single episode. All you have to do is be a featured guest on other people's shows and borrow their audience and bring it over to yours. So all you have to do is say, hey, Josh, let me put this on my feed. Now you can have a whole podcast with just content that you've done from other people interviewing you for their shows. That's going to go out on their feed and it's going to go out on your feed. So it's on double platforms, but you can promote the heck out of both through your social, through advertising, through everywhere you go. And that's how podcasts get big.
It really is exponential, isn't it? Right? The way each of your podcasts or your platforms or audiences are just going in together. And I'm glad that I asked that question because it relates back to you being a storyteller and what makes podcasts so special. And having this platform where people get to know you, of course, it's going to be easier to sell, right? Because at the end of the day, society is built in stories, right? I don't know if you've heard of that, but stories, everything has been a big, we're all built on story. History is built on stories. Everything is built on stories. That's why what makes podcasts so special. And speaking of stories, Shaahin, and this is one of my next questions. Shaahin, you have a book titled How I Became the King of the Thrill Pill Cult, right? And this is your rags to riches story. It's a wild journey that brought you here today. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like, there you go, guys. Make sure we're going to put that link down here. Make sure you guys buy that. I missed that word, Shaahin. I'm sorry. Billion is the word. Billion, How I Became the King of the Thrill Pill Cult. But Shaahin, my question was, those stories seem to be more rare these days. You hear less and less of these rags to riches success stories. My question now is, being in your success right now and with your experience when it comes to stories, do you still think it is possible to find and achieve that rags to riches story?
Yeah, I think anything's possible. I don't think it's impossible. I think, in fact, it's easier now with all the tools that we have to create huge wealth. But you have to become a salesperson. This makes people so uncomfortable. You have to know how to sell. But selling isn't what people normally think of as like the used car salesman with the cheap suit hanging out on the corner, trying to sell you a used car. What selling really is storytelling. If you look at the greatest salespeople that you've ever met, you never knew you were being sold because all they were doing was creating rapport and telling story. So
Yeah.
if you have a product, if you have a service, if you are looking to get to the path of wealth, get on the path of wealth, or to get on the path of accelerating the wealth that you have, the growth that you have, there is no single stronger way of you to sell your product, your service, whatever it is that you're doing, than through the power of story, through authority, through social proof. And the best way I know to do that is through podcasts. I've been watching podcasts take over for the last 3 years. And again, I'm really good at a very narrow band of things. I'm very good at spotting trends. I was talking to a friend the other night, and something really big is happening with podcasts right now. And if you are not in the podcast ecosystem, if you don't have a podcast, if you're not guesting on podcasts, if you're not involved, you are missing out.
So, Shaahin, I like the way that you put that right now, because when it comes to podcasting, people, again, we talked about this earlier, people start podcasts and it's so quiet, but it is still the best way to get started right now, and the best way to achieve that wealth and that rags to riches story. It is more possible right now, especially with the internet, especially online. But one last questions for you, Shaahin, before we wrap this up. We went a little bit over. Shaahin, many people quit their jobs. They dream to quit their jobs. I think that's also why people start podcasts, because they feel like it might help them quit their jobs. And you're telling us right now that yes, it is possible. But a simpler way to put it perhaps is people just don't longer want to trade their hours for profit, because at the end of the day, we don't want to be working too much. Shaahin, with your expertise and your storytelling, how can this be achievable? How can we create what you call predictable revenue streams in order to free our time more? And why is it podcasting?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Look, most of the people I know that are stressed, usually the reason why people are stressed is because they feel a restraint on their time. They feel like their time is not within their control. And here's the thing. If your time isn't within your control, there are things either, okay, so there's two scenarios if your time is not within your control. One, you're selling your hours, right? And we all know that selling your hours is the quickest way to become poor or broke. Why? Because last I checked, they're not making more hours, and everybody's got the same amount of them. You got 24 hours, president has 24 hours, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, everybody's got 24 hours in a day. So we know there are more hours. What we do know is how you handle those hours impacts your stress levels. So in order to have the lowest amount of stress, to thrive, to live a harmonious, successful, abundant life, you need to be able to know what I said in the very beginning of this interview, which was, in order to live a harmonious, abundant, successful life, let me say that again. In order to live a harmonious, abundant, and successful life, you need to know yourself. Yeah. You're going to be really good at a few things. Mm-hmm. You're going to be great at even fewer things. And you're going to be really bad at a ton of other things. That's so true. If it is not your expertise, if it is not your forte to do certain things, and in this example, I'm going to take your example, which is podcasting or getting booked on podcasts. Yeah. Find somebody who could handle that for you. And then you focus on the thing that you're great at. Yes, it's going to cost you some money. Yes, it's at first maybe a little bit uncomfortable to hand off something to somebody else. But I was talking to a guy just the other day who's like, man, I'm trying to get on podcasts. So I'm calling the podcast up myself. And, you know, it's just taking up all of my time. And I'm like, yeah, because you are a medical professional. You excel at doing that. You are world class, the best in the world at what you do. Why are you trying to do something that is not your expertise? Which is why clients come to us at Podcast Cola. because I tell people all the time this. We are really good at one thing and absolutely terrible at everything else. We suck at everything else, but we are really good at the ecosystem, at the sphere of influence of podcasting. Anything related to podcasting, we excel at. And particularly, we're really good at getting your story told on thousands of great podcasts, hundreds of great podcasts, tens of great podcasts, whatever you want, all over the world. And that's what we excel at. So when clients leave that to us, they leave the booking, the public relations on podcasts to us, it opens up all this time for them to go focus on their business. And what they see coming in through podcasts are more authority, more leads, more sales, more orders, more being known in your industry. And all that leads to the bigger picture. So if you're a smaller picture person, you're like, man, I'm going to put in $5 and get out $5.50 on the other end, and I want it done tomorrow. Podcasting isn't going to be right for you. But if you're a long-term thinker, if you're a legacy thinker, if you're one of those people that goes, you know what, I'm going to build this to being a multi-million-dollar brand, to being a 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure, billion-dollar brand. I'm going to build this company, my product or service, to be huge, then you need to start yesterday. The best time to start podcasting is yesterday. The second best time to start being a guest on podcasts, to being a featured guest on podcasts, is now.
Right now. There you go. There you have it, folks. The best time to start is today. You've got your podcast hacks. We had a little bit of life advice in there as well. Know yourself, know your strengths and weaknesses, get better at it, and like get into podcasting if this is really what you're into. So again, Shaahin, I'd like to thank you for coming on here. That was such a great interview. You put such a lot of wisdom into this whole podcasting ecosystem that we have, and you really are a good storyteller. So for anyone out there who is into storytelling as well, you guys want to learn more about podcasting, make sure you click subscribe. Make sure you share this episode to your friends. And again, we're going to leave the link down below for Shaahin's book, and make sure to also subscribe to his podcast. Once again, is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap this up, Shaahin?
Anybody that's interested in podcasting, check us out on podcastcola.com. If you want to reach out on Podcast Cola, it's Podcast Cola spelled just that way. You can book a free 15-minute consult with me, and let's go over your podcast strategy. I love meeting new people and talking to people and seeing how their business can be improved with podcasting. I like to think of myself as a podcast evangelist. So if you're interested in either improving your business, doubling, tripling your income through podcasts, reach out to us. It's podcastcola.com. And anybody that's interested in my story, you can check out my books. I've got a new book that just dropped called Podcast Famous. You can get that on Amazon, and it's available in both print and digital formats. And thanks for having me on the show, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Make sure to click that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.
Hang on one sec. Let me just record something. All right. So if we do end up broadcasting this and you're watching this being broadcast, this is a test episode that we're doing with a new host, but I decided to broadcast this on our channel. So if you're watching this, you're thinking, man, Shaahin, I know it's Business Story of the Week and you're the host, but how is it that you're a guest? Well, today we had Josh, who is auditioning for a host position. I think he did great, but let us know what you think in the comments below. And make sure to leave us a review if you're watching this. All right, Josh, thanks for doing that, buddy.
Thank you so much. Leave a like and comment below.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.